I found out my parents preferred a payout over a pulse. My name is Carol Connors, and I was born a placeholder. At least that's what it felt like growing up in a house where my brother's name echoed through every hallway, every photo frame, every future plan. Brian Connors, the prodigy, the performer, the pride. And then there was me, the backup plan. Or more often, the reminder that not every child is worth investing in. We weren't poor, we weren't cruel on the surface. We had matching towels and annual Christmas cards and a deck my dad rebuilt himself, or at least bragged about enough that people stopped asking if it was worth the cost. But underneath it all, there was a silence that followed me like a shadow, quiet, familiar, and permanent. Richard Connors, my father, was the kind of man who thought disappointment was a form of discipline. He rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it was to say things like, "You wouldn't last 2 weeks without this roof," or "Why can't you be more like Brian?" Sometimes he didn't need to say anything. Just a look across the dinner table was enough to remind me where I stood. Evelyn Connors. My mother was harder to place. She smiled at me like I was someone else's child. She never hit me. She never yelled. She just forgot I was in the room. And when she did remember, it was to correct how I chewed, how I dressed, how I showed up to family events without enough enthusiasm. By the time I was in my 30s, I had stopped asking them to see me. I kept to myself, worked the night shift at a local bookstore, paid my rent, returned their calls when I could stomach them. Brian had a law degree, a condo, and a fiancé my mother posted about more than she ever did her own daughter. But none of that, not the years of neglect, not the hollow birthdays, prepared me for the moment I'd learned they had something to gain from losing me completely. The rain had started halfway through my shift, soft at first, then heavier needles against the store's windows as I closed up alone. I remember thinking it felt theatrical, like a storm you'd cue in a movie when something's about to break. I wasn't wrong. The bookstore parking lot was empty. My breath fogged the windshield before the defrost caught up. The wipers groaned. I drove the same route home I always did, past the closed diner. The overgrown softball field, the church with its broken neon sign that still tried to spell grace. I knew every bump in the road, every flickering streetlight. But that night, something felt different. Halfway down I-93, my brakes hesitated just for a second. Enough for my heart to spike. I pressed again. They caught. I told myself it was the rain, maybe the tires, but a thought surfaced, quiet and persistent. When was the last time I got them checked? And then came the lights. A semi-truck ahead jackknifed across lanes, 2 cars slammed into it like toys. I swerved. Tires screamed. The guardrail blurred. My car hit the ditch so hard I felt it in my teeth. Something exploded. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the world was quiet. Not dead quiet, sterile quiet. A soft monitor beep overhead, fluorescence humming the smell of antiseptic and latex gloves. I tried to move and winced. That's when I saw him. A man in uniform sat beside the bed reading a clipboard. Late 40s, maybe 50, clean cut. Eyes tired, not from lack of sleep, but from having seen too much. He looked up and gave me a nod. "You're lucky," he said. "Car's totaled, but you'll be okay. No internal bleeding, just a mild concussion." I blinked, tried to focus. "What happened?" "We found your ID near another vehicle. Completely burned out. Couldn't ID the driver." He paused. His voice shifted. "Your parents. Think you died in that car." I stared at him. "What?" He looked away for a beat, then back. "I'm Officer Mark Tyler, and I'm here because the paperwork already started moving. Insurance claim. Death notice. Fast, almost too fast." My throat tightened dry and sharp. "They didn't call the hospital I asked." He shook his head. "They didn't even ask if you made it. They filed. Within 24 hours. I could have told Officer Tyler to fix it. To call the state records office, stop the paperwork, and inform the insurance company I was alive and well if bruised. But I didn't. Instead, I asked him something I'm still not sure he expected. What happens if we don't tell them yet?" He studied me long and careful. "You mean, let them think you're dead?" I nodded. "I want to see what they say I told him, what they post, who shows up. I want to hear the words they use when they think I can't hear them." For a moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, he set the clipboard down. "All right," he said. "But if we do this, we do it right. No contact, no social media, I know a place. Off-grid. No one'll find you." That's how I ended up in a one-room cabin tucked beside a lake I'd never heard of. with a chipped mug, a scratchy wool blanket, and a silence so loud I could hear the thoughts I'd been dodging for years. Tyler checked in once a day, brought food, no questions I wasn't ready for, just simple things. Did I sleep? Did I eat? Was I okay? On the second day, I said yes to all three. On the third, I stopped lying. It rained again that morning. He came back from town holding a folded program. They printed this, he said, handing it to me. The front had a photo of me from middle school science fair braces, one hand awkwardly holding a second-place trophy. I hadn't seen that picture in years. Underneath it read, "She was quiet, but tried her best." I sat down hard. Not from shock, from something colder, the kind of numb that starts in your spine and spreads like fog. Even dead, they couldn't say anything real. "Do you know the payout?" I asked him. He hesitated. 1 million. I didn't speak for a full minute. $1 million. That was what I was worth to them. Not a phone call, not a visit to the hospital, a number. "They filed everything within 24 hours, Tyler said again, voice low. "Didn't even wait for a body confirmation." I nodded. "Then let's give them what they want." "You sure know," I whispered, "but I'm tired of disappearing without ever knowing what it looked like." Sunday morning, the sky was too clear for a funeral. I wore black slacks, a plain white blouse, and tied my hair low. No makeup, no jewelry. Just enough to disappear into the room before I chose to be seen. Tyler drove me into town and parked 2 blocks from the church. He handed me a badge his own, then looked me in the eye. "If this goes sideways, I'm right behind you." The sanctuary smelled of lilies and old carpet. I slipped through the back door and stood beneath the balcony where the choir used to sing. The casket sat at the front draped in white, closed of course. There was no body, just air and weight and the lie they had polished until it looked respectable. My mother, Evelyn Connors, sat in the first pew in a navy silk dress, dabbing her eyes like it was opening night, and she'd memorized her lines. My father, Richard, stood near the aisle, speaking in a low voice to an insurance rep with slicked back hair and a briefcase on his knee. A few rows behind Brian leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "The policy should clear by Monday." Richard murmured. That to quick Brian asked. "As long as no loose ends show up," Richard said. Loose ends. That was me. I stepped into the center aisle and walked forward. The sound of my heels on the floor might as well have been a gunshot. Brian turned first. His mouth parted like a hinge. The insurance rep's pen hit the floor. Evelyn looked over her shoulder, expecting a late guest. Then she saw me. Her face drained of color as if someone had pulled the plug from her spine. She clutched her pearls, literal pearls, and let out a sharp, dry breath. Richard didn't move, just watched me like I was a dropped call. "You're supposed to be dead," he said softly. Not shocked, not relieved, just irritated. I stopped 3 feet from the casket. "Funny," I said. "I thought I was, too, until I woke up and found out you'd already signed me away." Evelyn's voice cracked. "Carol, you didn't call the coroner." I cut her off. "You didn't check with the hospital. You filed the paperwork and started cashing the check." She looked around as if searching for someone to explain it all for her. Richard straightened. "You were always a burden. We finally saw a way out." That was when Tyler stepped forward from the back of the church. No dramatics. Just one hand reaching into his jacket, pulling out a small black recorder. He pressed play. Richard's voice echoed. "She was always going to fail. We just made peace with it sooner." That was enough. The silence that followed wasn't holy. It was hollow. The clink of handcuffs didn't echo, but the flash of the first camera did. It didn't take long for the story to catch fire. The photo they used in the first article was one someone snapped outside the church, a blurry shot of me standing between 2 officers looking more like a protester than a daughter. The headline ran coast to coast before I'd even made it back to Tyler's truck. Daughter declared dead walks into her own funeral. Parents arrested at scene. By nightfall, my name, Carol Connors, was trending. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. I'd spent 3 decades trying to be invisible, and now I was the scandal no one could stop reading about. My parents were charged with insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. Richard, unshaken as ever, refused comment. Evelyn tried to cry again on the courthouse steps, but couldn't find a camera that cared. Brian, he wasn't arrested. He hadn't signed anything. But the world has its own kind of justice. Screenshots of texts leaked. A voicemail, too. His voice unmistakable. This crash might be our lucky break. His LinkedIn disappeared. The engagement announcement vanished. By the end of the week, the firm he worked for issued a quiet statement. No comment, but he was no longer employed. I didn't go back to the bookstore. I couldn't. The aisles would feel too small, the shelves too fragile for what I now carried. So I stayed in the cabin. Tyler came by more often, brought firewood, coffee, a paperback or two, even though I barely read anymore. One evening, he found me sitting on the back porch steps watching the water go still. "Why'd you help me?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee like it was something to hold on to. "Because I saw what they did," he said. "And because I lost my sister to people like that once. Couldn't save her. Thought maybe I could help someone else." I looked at him and saw it the truth, not in his words, but in the silence that followed. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because of nightmares, because I was planning. I didn't just want revenge anymore. I wanted something better, bigger. I wanted to make it all real, make it matter, make sure they couldn't bury me a second time, not under lies, not under silence. Filing the civil suit felt less like opening a case and more like opening a wound, but this time I didn't flinch. With Tyler's help, I gathered everything, old voicemails, emails, texts, documents that used to feel like small slights, birthday checks that vanished college applications. My mother forgot to mail bank statements showing my parents used my identity for a rental deposit I never lived in. The weight of it wasn't in the paperwork, it was in the pattern. They hadn't just tried to erase me with a death certificate, they'd been chipping away at me for years. The turning point came when I found the letter. Tucked in a box in my old bedroom under a stack of unused Christmas cards was a folded sheet of paper. Dated 6 months before the crash, signed by Evelyn. If anything ever happens to Carol, Brian must be the sole beneficiary of her policy and estate. She wouldn't know what to do with money anyway. I read it 3 times before I let myself feel it. It wasn't just a backup plan. It was a bet they thought would pay off. The trial drew more attention than the funeral ever had. Reporters showed up every day. The courtroom buzzed like a beehive. I walked in with my head high and my heart steady. Evelyn wore gray, conservative suit, hair curled into soft waves, makeup just enough to suggest mourning. On the stand, her voice trembled. "They told us it was her," she said. "We were grieving. We didn't mean to rush the paperwork." The prosecutor tapped the screen. A Facebook post lit up, "God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes we must let go to move forward. Brian will carry our family now, 2 hours after filing the insurance claim," he said. She blinked, couldn't answer. Then came Richard. He didn't bother with performance. When asked why he didn't verify my death, he leaned back and said flatly, "Because it didn't matter. She was always going to fail. We just made peace with it sooner." The air in the room changed. You could feel the jury shift in their seats, a collective inhale held too long. But I wasn't finished. When it was my turn, I brought the letter. I read it aloud, every word. My voice didn't shake. Then I told them the part no document could capture. They didn't mourn me. They didn't even wonder if maybe I was still out there bleeding somewhere. They just made a call to the bank, booked a vacation, buried an empty box, and made peace with the fact that they were finally free of me. It took the jury less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. But this time, the victory didn't feel like closure. It felt like clearance. The road was open, and I was the one walking it now. I didn't go quiet after the trial. Some people thought I would, that I'd retreat again, slip back into whatever shadow I used to live in. But I'd already been buried once. I wasn't climbing back into the ground. Instead, I spoke. I told my story on podcasts at shelters to students and survivors and strangers who wrote to say, "This happened to me too." I wrote a book, Buried Alive, the daughter they tried to cash in. It wasn't polished, it wasn't bitter, it was honest. It became a bestseller. I donated the profits to start something I wish had existed when I was 19, and scared and convinced that being unloved meant being unworthy. The Phoenix Foundation opened its doors 9 months after the trial. It wasn't grand, just a converted community center with 3 bedrooms, a shared kitchen, and a garden the local seniors helped us grow. But it was a beginning. We took in kids who'd been kicked out, cut off, scapegoated, erased. Not cases, not causes, just people trying to make sense of what it means to survive your own blood. One night, a girl named Mariah asked if she had to earn her keep. I told her no. You already did, I said. You made it through. The more I spoke, the more I listened, and what I heard again and again was this. They didn't hit me. They didn't scream. They just made me feel like I didn't count. I knew that feeling like an old song. And every time I looked around that kitchen, every time someone laughed over spaghetti or fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie, I thought this is the family I built, not the one I survived. 3 years later, I stood in a quiet meadow behind the shelter. The grass was soft under my shoes. The air smelled like paint and fresh soil. A group of teenagers were finishing a mural on the side wall brushes, moving like they'd done it 100 times. At the center of the mural was a woman rising through flame, wings of firearms, lifted eyes open, not crying, not broken, just rising. Beneath her in block letters, "You are not disposable." I stared at it for a long time. That version of me, the one who begged to be chosen, who memorized the shape of her parents' silence, was gone. Not buried in a casket, but burned out of me by the fire they lit when they tried to profit off my name. Evelyn was denied early release after faking illness in prison. Richard worked warehouse jobs and tried to sell a book about forgiving your ungrateful children. No one picked it up. Brian filed for bankruptcy. He sent me one last email, "I hope you're happy." I didn't answer. Tyler stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. "You rebuilt what they tried to destroy," he said. "No," I whispered. "I built what they never could. They called her a burden, filed papers instead of calling a hospital. Buried an empty box and toasted their freedom, but she didn't haunt them. She outlived them, not in spite, but in silence. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She walked in, told the truth, and walked out. If you've ever watched your family grieve someone they never really saw, if you've ever sat at the table and felt like the seat beneath you didn't exist, then maybe you understand why Carol didn't reply to that last message. Maybe you know what it means to choose peace, not to forgive, but to finally stop asking to be chosen. You don't have to say everything. Just leave one word you wish they'd said to you, or just a dot. Sometimes that's all it takes to say, "I'm still here."